It's Sue's first meeting. I wonder, would the panel introduce themselves individually as to who they are? Yeah, we'll start with Mr. Pickup.
My name's Keith Pickup. I'm an independent member on the panel for the past 5 years.
Chris Brown, Liberal Democrat member of Liverpool City Council.
Councillor Les Rowlands, Conservative Councillor for Heswell.
Paul Hooton, Green Councillor for Haydock Ward, St Helens Metropolitan Borough Council.
Ryan Taddeo, Independent Panel Member.
Paul Spencer, Labour Councillor, St Oswald's, Sefton, and also Vice Chair.
Barbara Murray, Councillor for Yew Tree Ward, Liverpool City Council.
And myself, John Sayers, I'm the Councillor for Park Ward in McGull for Sefton Council. Have we received any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we've received 4 apologies from Councillors Aston, Jones, Ozendeko and Smeeder.
Thank you. Colleagues, if we turn to the minutes of the previous meeting, if you have any objections to the minutes from our last meeting, you'll find them at pages 1 to 10 on the 2nd of September 2021, being received as a correct record. Please indicate if you wish to speak via pushing the right-hand side button on the microphone in front of you. As there are no indications to speak an objection, it will be recorded that the minutes are agreed. Thank you. Item 2 is any declarations of interest being submitted?
No, Chair, no declarations submitted.
Right, and there's none being declared now. Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, colleagues. If we move to item 3A on the agenda, which you'll find at pages 11 to 72, our first item is the Merseyside Police and Crime Commissioner's Police and Crime Plan for 2021 to 2025, and I'd like to invite the Commissioner to take us through your report.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair. So, yeah, this is the hopefully final version of the Police and Crime Plan. You very kindly submitted your feedback in between the last meeting and this meeting. We've tried to incorporate as much of that as possible. There were a couple of areas where I think we had not been able to quite add the comments that had been suggested, but hopefully we've explained the reasons why, and hopefully that's been understood by panel members. But yes, no, it's there for reading really, and hopefully you're happy to endorse it after this meeting.
Are we starting questioning now?
No,
oh, okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll shortly ask for any questions or comments. But firstly, I've been asked, could I again remind panel members, use the right-hand button on the microphone when you wish to speak. I'll bring you in when it's your turn, and then you only need to press it to close the microphone. Once you're satisfied, you've had an adequate response and you're not going to ask any further questions. So having said that, do we have any questions or comments? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. In the covering report 4.2, it mentions about the additional responsibilities for the PCCs over the coming term. I wonder whether the report itself needs to kind of detail that in a bit more, and are you confident that it's reflected across the document in more detail, really?
So I think in terms of any kind of change in legislation and changes to the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner, it's a bit of an ongoing process. So the plan itself will be reviewed regularly anyway. So as and when there's any changes to legislation or changes to my role and the work that I'm doing, we'll make sure that it's reflected in the kind of annual review of the plan that we do. I didn't want to put too much detail in to kind of confuse to what may or may not be coming down the line. So yeah, so as things progress and if things do change with the role and any legislation that goes through Parliament, we'll make sure that's reflected in future kind of variations of it.
Thank you. Mr. Taddeo? Oh, no, I do beg your pardon, it's Councillor Rowlands, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Morning, Commissioner. Yeah, you've acknowledged in the plan that the integrated care system has been omitted, but obviously this is a 5-year plan, And at the moment, we've got the CCG remains. What you going to do about that sort of gap in the changeover?
So it's something that we're very kind of closely monitoring. I guess, you know, there's a lot of references in the plan to working in partnership, and I think there's going to be lots of changes to what that partnership work looks like as we go through the next, you know, 4 or 5 years. So we're monitoring what the integrated care system looks like, and how we might best feed into that. So again, we're still waiting for some of the details, so I haven't gone into lots of detail about that specific area of work, because as it currently stands, our relationship is with the CCGs, and we did consult with them, and we do consult with them regularly around various pieces of work. As and when it changes to become the integrated care system, we'll make sure that's reflected. Again, as I say, in future variations of the plan, but also I don't think anyone's really clear yet exactly how it's going to work, and I think there's lots of questions from partners around the best way that we'll be feeding into that. So it's something that we're monitoring, and we'll make sure it feeds into kind of any future plan variations. Does that make sense?
Would that be fed back to the panel
Yeah.
as and when it comes up?
Yeah, certainly.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Mr Tadeo?
Yeah, good morning. It's a very comprehensive plan. It's over a 5-year period. When it's adopted, is there any, what are your main priorities? What's the top, say, 2 or 3 priorities that you're going to do? Is it going to be different from now, or that you need to take on?
So what's going to happen next, now the plan hopefully is signed off and endorsed today, is I've already had a conversation with my new interim chief exec to talk about how we can get a delivery plan to sit around this, so to look at focus at, there'll be certain pieces of work that will happen probably in the near future. For example, the work around tackling violence against women and girls. That was something I said from the off I wanted to really get moving, and in the light of recent events, it's very, you know, important that we pick up that piece of work. Other areas highlighted in the plan might be phased into subsequent months and years, just to balance the resource and the workload in the office. But the plan now is, once we've got this plan signed off, there will be an action plan, a delivery plan that will sit behind that. So I'm more than happy to share that with the panel once we've done that. Well, now we've identified all the actions I'm going to do, we're going to try and work to a project plan, if you will, to try and make sure that we can phase it in the different years, through the years of my terms of office. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but what are your priorities, or what do you think will be your priorities that you'll need to do something from day one when you adopt the plan?
Immediately. Well, the tackling violence against women and girls would be up there as one of my key pieces of work. Some work around, I'm trying to think now what, some of the victims' work that we've talked about. So we're doing all that victims' referral review and the victim support, so that'll be a priority because the commissioning cycle will be starting. I know we've got a later conversation around that. The priorities around the scrutiny, so further development of the scrutiny, so the scrutiny board that I mentioned at the last meeting, developing that and getting that in place to kind of aid the scrutiny I'm doing of the Chief Constable, and also the victims panel will probably be some of the key projects that I'd like to get going in the near future. But some of it will be worked through, as I say, because it does rely on the office being able to deliver what it is I want to do. So some of that will be negotiated with the team to work out the best way to do it. But in my head, those are probably some of the key areas I want to focus on.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mr Tadeo. Councillor Spencer.
Just to come in on what you're saying, I'm made up over the route that we're going on, violence obviously against women and young girls, and obviously women have a confidence in reporting, you know, when they've been attacked and that. Do you think we could approach something on, especially with recent events, the distrust between women and the police, especially when we're given advice on if a police officer comes to you, run to the bus, or if a police officer comes to you, make sure there's 2. This is not what we should be putting forward to women. You know, the police is someone that if I was being assaulted or if I felt threatened, that I shouldn't be looking saying, oh no, hang on, there's a police officer, I'll run away from the person that's attacking me, and I also have to run away from the police. We have to build that trust back up. Is there anything that we can do? I mean, I can't stress how made up I am on all the things that are being put in place for, you know, victims and you know, women in general. But we need to have that faith that we can go to the police, we feel confident to go to the police, and I don't think that little bit on that's who we can go to, that's who we should go to. It shouldn't be a should we, it shouldn't be a let me think about this, is there anyone else? To me, that should be our first protocol.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And I've had many conversations with the Chief Constable about how she's going to do that and how she's going to rebuild the trust with communities and women in particular. My next scrutiny meeting is going to be focused on victims and in particular looking at this violence against women and girls. Partly, I think, in some ways, for the Chief to be able to demonstrate the work that she's already doing to make sure that women do get a good response and that they are being proactive to tackle these issues. Merseyside is a very different place to the Met in London, and it's not perfect by any means. It's definitely got its challenges and its issues, but it is a very different place. So part of the reason behind changing the agenda slightly in the order of my scrutiny meetings was to try and really address this issue in public. So my next scrutiny meeting will be looking at all of these issues around what the police are doing, how proactively are they encouraging women to report, how are they making sure that women will get the right response when they do report, and what we're doing to try and make sure that cases are getting through the criminal justice system as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. So absolutely that will be a key part of the conversation. It was going to be anyway, and I think recent events have obviously highlighted just how important this conversation is. So hopefully that scrutiny meeting will kind of be an opportunity for the public to see some of the conversations that we're having, and then we'll keep having the conversation going forward.
Thank you.
Councillor Brown. Just to back to today's question about the delivery plan of this. First question on this, I suppose, is appreciate you might have actually already answered this. Are we expecting a report on that at the next panel meeting? Could we have a report on that in terms of the delivery plan by that time? But can I also make a personal plea? And I think your number one priority in getting on with that is really important, but also around road safety. You and I will remember during the hustings of the Police and Crime Commissioner elections how important road safety was, and one of the very few hustings that we had, but we have some of the worst stats for road safety anywhere in the country. My role, and I'm sure your role previously as a councillor, it was always coming up around road safety. So can I make a personal plea that is prioritised higher? And actually, I think also, we've got things like COP26 coming up. There's opportunities to kind of link in some of that report and doing things, I think, to get some more public imagination around kind of that kind of thing, really. I don't know. But, yeah.
No, absolutely. Road safety will be another one of those issues that we will be focusing on. To be honest, I've already started work on that, particularly looking at how we embed the work of the Road Safety Partnership within the Combined Authority, for example. How do we make sure that local authorities are buying into this agenda, and that road safety is something that doesn't sit separately, that it's actually something that filters into all the pieces of work we do. So we have already started to have those conversations. In terms of the action plan and the delivery plan, more than happy to share it with you. I'll be totally honest, we are going through a period of change within the office in terms of staff moving, and so you'll see we've done some recruitment, but we've had some other people leave since then, and so we need to do some recruitment for them. So I'll probably need a bit of time to try and get my ducks in a line, if that makes sense, to make sure I've got the right staff in place to be able to deliver on these things. So that's probably the conversation I'll be having over the next few weeks with Sue, to make sure we've got the right resource to deliver on these bits. But yes, absolutely, road safety is definitely going to be in there as one of the key areas. We've already started talking about it because, as you say, it is a big issue for the public. So, yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Pickup?
Yeah, Chair. Commissioner, you referred to criminal justice system a moment ago. I was going to raise this under the victim needs assessment issue, because I think it's part of that work. That's where it occurred to me. But it does seem to me that in this report, that criminal justice system and the way the police works with together and what needs to be done in cooperation with that, particularly reinforcing what Councillor Spencer has said in relation to women and how they suffer and have suffered going through the criminal justice system. I think it's vitally important that we develop proper and good relationships with the criminal justice system, whether it be magistrates, judges, whatever. And I think at the moment that doesn't appear to come through in the plan to me. You may point me to pages where it does, but honestly, somebody reading it, I think for me it's not emphasised enough. Let's put it that way. And I felt in terms of the victim needs, again, that was a package issue that it's not, as this sense, brought together. And I would be looking for that development of a relationship with the criminal justice system as we move forward.
Okay, no, that's useful feedback. I think, so I have tried to highlight it on, it's page 35 of the actual report of my plan, where we put the spotlight on the Merseyside Criminal Justice Board. I suppose the challenge with writing the plan is that there is so much out there, and without making it, you know, reams and reams of pages, it needs to be digestible for the public, and, you know, with, you try and make a judgment as to how much detail you want to put out there so the public can get a handle on what it is that I'm going to be focusing on. So I have tried to, with that spotlight there on the Criminal Justice Board, to highlight the kind of partnership work that we'll be doing. So all of those criminal justice partners will be sat around that table, and we'll be looking at some of these issues like, for example, domestic abuse cases and sexual violence cases and how they go through the system, and how do we make sure that we're getting positive outcomes. So all of that will be in there, and I've tried to cover that within the Justice Board. And I suppose it's probably worth saying that this isn't the kind of final, this won't be the only communication I ever put out. So as we develop some of these pieces of work, there'll be lots more communication that comes out around action plans. So, for example, the Criminal Justice Board has will have its own kind of strategy and aims and priorities, and we'll be developing that over the next few months, looking ahead for the next few years. So once that is developed, we can probably share that with the public to say this is where we're going to focus on. So I suppose it's probably just worth saying this won't be the only thing that the public will ever see. There will be further conversations we have around priorities, working with partners like those in the criminal justice system.
Just if I may, Chair, to add one comment. When I was a magistrate, seems a long time ago now, but one of the things that did happen at the time was actually some of us magistrates were involved in police training when they looked at community issues and issues of cases going through the court, etc. I'm aware that the court is not built to give the sort of support, and that's why I was originally associated with Victims' Needs, is not built to, in that sense, care for people, if I can be as blunt as that. And I think there does need to be more collaboration, more understanding of what each party is going through as cases are investigated and brought to court, etc., and how they're handled. It's a little bit more specific to me than the Criminal Justice Board, so I look forward to the action plan associated with it.
And yes, I mean, on that point, I would agree with you. I'm very mindful of the fact that my powers as a PCC don't, you know, go over to the courts and other criminal justice agencies in the same way they do with the police. So I'm very much relying on that kind of partnership work and, you know, buy-in from those partners to work with me. We do have one of the subgroups of the Criminal Justice Board is the Victims and Witnesses group. So they are very focused on how do we make sure that victims and witnesses who might be giving evidence in court or who might be hearing their case, what support is in place for them. So one of the actions that we'll be looking at will be, you know, how are we improving the process for those victims, and that'll be some of the work that they will be picking up. There was something else I was going to say then. No, it's gone out of my head. But yes, I'm more than happy to share any further information as we develop the piece of work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councillor Murray.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Commissioner, I'm just looking at page 36, and you say you will support work to develop a problem-solving court for female offenders. I just wondered if you could explain what that might look like or how it might operate, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so we've already actually started work to develop this, which is really positive. So basically, the whole ethos behind a problem-solving court is that you, the individual, the offender who's sitting in front of you, you have a conversation with them about what it is that's driving their offending. So and quite often it will be, it might be drugs and alcohol, it might be mental health crisis, it might be, you know, some maybe trauma or abuse they've suffered in the past, and that's particularly prevalent with female offenders. So what we're trying to do is actually get a real kind of a specialist court, and the people who would sit on that court understand the kind of experiences that these individuals have gone through. And what they say is, rather than passing a sentence that says you have to go away and do this, that, or the other, or go to jail, or whatever the sentence might be, they say, actually, we're going to tell you to go and do 6 months of a rehabilitation programme. You know, we want you to go to treatment for your drug or alcohol addiction. And then they come back to the court every few months to kind of say, well, how are you getting on? you know, how you're doing. And if the judge isn't satisfied that enough progress has been made, they have the ability to go, look, you've got to, you know, pull your socks up, you need to engage with the programme, or actually we will put you through the system and you will go into that you know, kind of sentencing kind of pathway. But it's about trying to empower judges to give alternative options and actually put them into a, like it says, a problem-solving approach. So there's been some really good successes with kind of broader problem-solving courts, and we have one in Sefton already, actually. But we're looking to do one that's specifically for female offenders that looks very specifically at the instances that females are getting involved in offending, and do a similar approach. So hopefully we'll divert more women out of the criminal justice system.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions on this one? No. If I could just ask a question, Commissioner. I thought the, obviously given the circumstances of COVID, etc., that we're going through, the consultation was as good as it was going to be. Were there any significant changes to the model of plan that you put forward as a result of consultation with the public? Is there anything you could say, point to?
I don't think there were any major changes, which I guess was reassuring in terms of what I'd been hearing in the lead up to the election was kind of then reflected by the consultation I did following that. There were probably some kind of specific examples and specific pieces of work. So things like road safety, there were some specific projects that people were keen to see highlighted. I'm trying to think of anything else. There were some specifics, I think, that we flagged up that I think potentially may feed into what comes as part of the action plan. But in terms of the broad themes, the broad issues, reassuringly, the public were, and the consultation very much backed up, I think, what we were seeing as the main areas. Oh, the only probably one I will highlight was one of our partners highlighted gambling as a concern in their area. So under that kind of substance misuse heading, it isn't just drugs and alcohol, we also know the harm that gambling addiction can have and the impact that can have on offending. So that was something I hadn't picked up on explicitly, but we've tried to highlight that, and we will highlight that in the work going forward. So that was probably one that we hadn't spotted that is now in the plan.
Yeah, thanks very much. Just comments really. The problem-solving court, I'd highly endorse that. I had the privilege to go to with Judge Abelson over to Red Hook in Brooklyn to see the prototype court that was run and then was remodelled in North Liverpool in Vauxhall. So, you know, it's very effective. The other thing is the comments from Councillor Spencer. I know in informal discussions with members of the panel, we all share, councillors, and I'm sure you do as well, those concerns as to what mechanisms are going to be put in place with immediacy, really, to reassure vulnerable people and vulnerable females. It strengthens your arm and strengthens Serena's arm in actions that you need to take, then I think you will find that the panel would support that. You know, it's something that needs to be addressed with a matter of urgency. Any other comments, colleagues, on this one? It's probably one of the most important things that we have to do. This is to endorse the crime plan for the Commissioner. So, subject to our comments being taken on board then, are the panel members happy to firstly endorse the contents of the Police and Crime Plan for 2021-2025, which is attached to Appendix A to the report? Thank you, that's unanimous, I think. Can we agree then that a formal written response from the panel will be sent to the Commissioner in accordance with our statutory duty, and that the lead authority to finalise the response, so that will be delegated to the lead officer, Mr Moran, in consultation with me as my role as chair. Unless anybody objects, then I'll take it that we all support that. So as there are no indications to speak or any objections, then it will be recorded, Commissioner, that the actions endorsed, the report's endorsed. Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. If we move to 3B then, it's the Commissioner's medium-term financial strategy, pages 73 to 90. Our next item, as I say, is the medium-term financial strategy. So, Commissioner, would you like to take us through that report?
Yes, thank you. So hopefully some colleagues on the panel will have seen the original budget that was published a few months ago. So this is basically just an update as to where that's up to. Table 1 on page 75 is probably the most useful. That gives you a summary of the kind of overall budget that we are going to be looking at. There are a number of assumptions within this, and those assumptions are very much assumptions, and we wait to get a lot of clarity in terms of what's going to come out of the comprehensive spending review. So we're hopefully due next week, I think, the overall announcement from the spending review, and then December we'll get more detail around the policing kind of settlement and what that will look like. So we've made the assumptions based on what we know so far. It's, you know, we wait to see what the government will say in the coming months. I suppose it's also worth highlighting as well, so myself and colleagues within the other PCC colleagues across the country have worked together with the National Police Chiefs Council, so with police colleagues, to make a submission to the Comprehensive Spending Review, and we're very happy to share that with you in terms of what we've asked for, but it very much centred around a request for further investment in frontline policing, further investment in things like officer and staff pay, which obviously has been lacking for the last couple of years, and issues like that, and more work around prevention. So I'm happy to share that, but otherwise happy to take any questions, and obviously I've got my very clever finance officer who can answer any difficult questions that I can't answer, if the panel have any.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any questions on this one? Mr. Tadeo?
Looking at page 76 in Table 2, it mentions the potential of a 1% increase in price inflation. Well, inflation is probably going to be running at 3 to 4% next year. So that's probably going to leave this planet, you know, further into deficit, isn't it? And with the strain on council tax, heating, energy, and so on. I mean, it's, you know, looking at the precept cost, this is a personal view. I mean, you know, you have the previous incumbent sort of took it to the maximum 5%, or sorry, the maximum percentage. Is there an alternative that you can consider? It's going to be really difficult this year for well, households in Merseyside really to, you know, to meet the costs of any, you know, additional the precept cost basically.
It's an absolutely fair point in terms of the precept, and you know, we're waiting to see what the government will say and whether we're given those same powers and expectation to raise the council tax again. And I am, like you, very aware of the fact that households are already struggling, and the additional pressures that we're going to see because of inflation and because of the costs to things like heating and energy, as you say. So, I mean, I'd welcome any early thoughts of the panel as to what we might do for that. It's a very difficult situation for PCCs across the country because ultimately we know we need more funding, and if the only avenue is council tax, that might be where we have to go. But I'm very open to feedback, and I'm also looking to have those conversations with obviously the Mayor and the Metro Mayor and local authorities as well in terms of what they might decide to do, because obviously the council tax is a broader tax. I don't know if you want to say anything specifically about the
I think it's important that the force are looking at savings. There is £3.5 million worth of savings built into the MTFS at the moment, right. But there is a savings and investment plan. It's a 2-day event where all the departments in the force have got to produce saving plans for the chief to consider going forward, and they've been asked to make, at the moment, I try and identify 5% worth of savings across the board. Now, clearly, those savings will be built into the conversation that we'll have with the Commissioner in terms of what the precept will be. But I mean, the government are likely not to give us any more general grants on except for the increase in uplift funding for the police officers. Right. So it is a real difficult balancing act, but we'll obviously consider everything and then come back to yourselves in February with the precept report to give you an indication what the Commission's plans are going forward. But the force are looking actively for savings. The problem will be with uplift, you're having to maintain police officer numbers. The only cuts then you can make, if you have to make savings, are to police staff posts, which will mean police officers actually doing the jobs of police staff, potentially. There's a thing called decivilisation, and that's really not what we want. And that's been part of the submission to the government to say, look, you know, if you don't give the proper settlement, this is likely to happen going forward. So there's a lot of unknowns at the moment, a lot of challenges for the Commissioner, and obviously to consult yourselves and people of Merseyside to get a view on the precept going forward.
Okay, no, thanks. I know it's difficult. Yeah.
See, Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Chair. 4.110, Table 3, also relates to the pay awards and 2 scenarios that are put down there. I guess in either scenario, I'm eager to find out what the process is in terms of identifying those savings. And I guess in a worst case scenario, you know, could this lead to redundancies, do you think, in either of those scenarios? Perhaps?
So the police force currently have a policy of no compulsory redundancies, which is right, and you know they have had some voluntary redundancies where there's been some changes, but the process at the minute is that they don't want to make anybody redundant. I think, as John's highlighted, there is a process for identifying savings. They're asking all departments to have a look at their budgets and identify where they can try and find the savings that might need to be identified. Obviously, you know, the table 3, those are very much scenarios that may or may not come to pass. So if they do, then we'll be going back to the force to have that conversation around how feasible it is to find the savings. But they do have a process in place where they ask departments to go away and have a look and see what savings can be made. Also, if any additional income can be brought in as well. So they do have a commitment to look at income generation and where funds can be brought in to try and offset savings as well. I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I mean, most of the budget is on staff costs. Sorry. Most of it is on staff costs. Most of the easy savings have been, most of the easy savings have been done over the last 10 years, to be honest. So any savings will be predominantly around police staff posts, I would imagine, because of police uplift. You know, if you don't increase your police officer numbers, you won't get your funding for that. That's part of the deal, really. So going forward, so it is a major challenge. But as we say, we need to make sure we know exactly what the situation is, and there'll be some tough decisions that the Commission will have to make in conjunction, let's say, with the Chief Constable and obviously consulting yourselves as well.
Thank you. Mr. Pickup.
Mr. Chair, I query in the report, honestly, whether it is fair to make the assumption that the comprehensive spending review will be the same or will result in the same amounts. We're all aware of the increased demands on the police placed by the government. I'm not talking about society, but there are increased demands. We know that the sort of thing we've talked about already today, there are increased demands on the police in terms of their flexibility, their understanding of community, etc. And thirdly, the fact is that we know that the formula used to arrive at the allocation to the police has been wrong for years. And I know that as a panel, we've previously made representation to the government regarding that failure to review that and question when it's going to be reviewed, and it's still not been undertaken. We currently also have a government which is referring to levelling up, which makes no sense to me in terms of any application of a previous formula. So I will be quite interested to see how this spending review turns out. But I seriously question that assumption that it's going to remain the same that is built into the report. It may be that the Commissioner and her office feel that they cannot do anything else at the moment, but I think it's not a fair assumption to make, and the numbers might be there in terms of what you have to use in the report, but I think in all honesty we need to expect some variation.
It's a fair comment, and I guess as part of trying to be responsible with the budget and the financial planning is that we kind of prepare for the worst, I suppose. So, you know, I'm eternally hopeful that they may see sense and hopefully give us a bit more funding. I'm not confident that's going to be the case. You talk about the demand on the police, and that's right. And actually, I think there's some argument that says you need to be investing in the services that actually are underfunded, and therefore that demand is created on policing, like issues like mental health services and health services. Because of the underfunding of those services, they are unable to deal with a lot of issues that then the police end up having to take on. So actually there's an argument that says if you invest up there and you reduce the demand on the police, you then free up police resources. The challenge with that is that obviously that takes time. And so you kind of can't take funding from one place and hope it just happens overnight, because it doesn't work like that. So these are the conversations that we're having with government in terms of how we can get the right approach to the funding. And there was something else I was going to say in relation to your second point. What was your second point? Oh, funding formula, thank you. Yeah, so they have started conversations around the funding formula as well. We have been told that it's not going to be done in time for this spending review, but we're hoping, well, the conversation has started around what that's going to look like, and it's going to probably go into next year in terms of what that might look like. I would always say that with the caveat with any funding formula review is that there will be winners and there will be losers, and the pie will only ever be so big, and it will be split up a certain way. And so I'm very mindful of the fact that there is a lot of people saying that Merseyside doesn't already get more than its fair share out of the funding formula, and so I'm very mindful that there will be other police forces and PCCs across the country looking to change that in a way that will benefit them and disadvantage Merseyside. And obviously that's something given the challenges that we have here, but I'm somewhat kind of anxious, I guess, about the funding formula review and what criteria. So we're trying to make sure that we're part of this conversation, so the criteria they consider are the right criteria, and we'll address the issues that we know we face on Merseyside to make sure that we get. But the conversation is starting, so I will also keep you updated if we make any progress.
Yeah, sorry, John.
Just in terms of the assumptions, Keith, I mean, they're based on what's happened over the last two years, to be honest. We've seen no increase in the general grant except for uplift, and that's what we put in there. The government, and what they've done is greater flexibility around the precept, but encouraged commissioners to set it at the maximum. Now, in the MTFS at the moment, we've dropped it back down to 2%, which is the historical level before the last three years, where it's gone up from 12, 24 to last year £15. But that's the way the government have given forces more money by allowing greater flexibility around the precept, not actually through the general grant situation. And that's, I say, the logic for those assumptions are based on what's happened over the last 3 years. And the other thing in terms of the funding formula, per head of population, we receive most apart from, I think, Northumbria. So we've got to be, there's a real risk here that any review of the funding formula will move money away from Merseyside to other forces, because we, in terms of grant per head of population, we're receiving one of the most generous, I say generous, wrong word, but that's where we are. So any movements, it's like we're likely to suffer, I would imagine, not benefit.
Thank you, Commissioner and John. Keith. Councillor Hooton.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I think you have just answered my question. I was going to ask regarding the precept referendum threshold. It's been set at 2%, but I think you just answered it. It was not quite 14% in 2020, 5% in 21, and 7%. I was going to ask what the rationale was, but I think it's already been explained. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rowlands.
Thanks, Chair. Commissioner, I appreciate the spending review has not come out yet. But there is other ways that we can start to look at, and I'm wondering whether this is being looked into. You know, you reported to us last time that they suspended the estate when we were looking at the police estate buildings and so forth because of COVID. Is that now back on track, and are things being looked at to save money by doing that? The other point is amalgamation. I asked the previous about amalgamation of services, so we can save money, i.e. fire, ambulance, police using the same buildings. Has that anything come about that? Has there anything been looked into that in savings? Because obviously we are worried, like everybody else around the country, at the precepts coming into our boroughs, and you know, anything that can be done and shown to be done is that to mitigate that is going to be helpful.
Apologies, Councillor Rowlands. There's a specific item on the estates. I think it's next on the agenda. I wonder whether, I mean, unless, you know, John thinks there's any issues in respect of the medium-term financial strategy affected here, I wonder whether we could park that and deal with it under estates.
Just like that, Councillor Rowlands, right, we did the estate strategy. One of the reasons is to make sure we can, once we've got the settlement, we can then see what we can afford in terms of going forward. And certainly not just over the medium term, over the longer term, because some of the things with the estate are, they take 3 or 4 years to build, but then after that you start paying for them if you want. You have to budget for them, and that can often be outside of the MTFS period. So the 7 million here, if you build a new building or whatever, it could add another 3 or 4 million pound on to, you know, just outside the MTFS period, but you need to make sure you reflect that or consider that going forward as part of your plans.
And then in terms of the second part of the question, in terms of the amalgamation with fire, and yes, we are looking at all sorts of opportunities. We have a joint committee with fire, and we're trying to have the same conversations with ambulance services as well. It's a challenge because a lot of it is about timing and phasing, and you know the fire service have already pushed ahead with certain buildings, and so in some senses we've missed opportunities to do some things. But we are very mindful of where we can share premises, and there has been a lot of that work done in the past. Like for example the Joint Command Control Centre in on Bridle Road in Bootle, that was a good partnership project. So there is a lot of work being done to try and co-host where we can and identify opportunities to share kind of buildings or training or whatever it might be that's relevant to try and save costs. So we are having those conversations.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item, colleagues? John, I don't know if you can help me. Wasn't there a massive shift in percentage of the core grant that funded the force to where we are now in respect of the precept?
I think we've gone from about it's like 15% precept to up to around about 20% now of the funding being funded from the precept. There has been that shift over time. That's been really government policy, and obviously the pressure put on commissioners to raise money through the precept.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that, because I know in the past the panel hasn't been very happy over that shift, and I know that's not the responsibility of the PCC, but if it can be reflected back, because of course council tax is a regressive tax, whereas the core funding comes from income tax, which is a more progressive tax. So I know in the past, I can't speak for the current panel because we've not made any decisions on it, but I know in the past the panel wrote to the government as well to say that we were unhappy with that massive shift to the precept away from the core grant. Thanks for that.
That certainly is the message that myself and other Labour PCCs are saying as well. And so I think we'd very much welcome any comments from the panel if you were to endorse that view as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So any other comments on that? So subject to our comments being taken on board, I'll be happy to acknowledge the medium-term financial strategy as set out in Appendix 1 and the process for it to be updated as part of the 2022-23 budget process. Unless anyone indicates to speak an objection, then I'll take it that we are satisfied. Right, thank you, colleagues. So as there are no indications to speak an objection, it will be recorded that this action has been endorsed. I'd just like to add, Commissioner and to Mr Riley, as there are elements of the medium-term financial strategy that clearly will be subject to change in the coming months, the panel would look forward to the Chief Fine Officer's usual budget briefing prior to the February meeting, which would help us understand the updated position. So would that still be, Commissioner, are you still happy for that to happen? Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. If we turn to item 3C, our next item is the Police and Crime Commissioners' decisions. We'll find that at pages 91 to 92. Would you like to take us through that, Commissioner?
Yeah, so a number of decisions there. Happy to take any questions on them. I suppose the only one to highlight really is just obviously the appointment of Sue as my interim chief exec, and just to kind of put on record my thanks to the chair for kind of observing the process and being satisfied that it was a robust and a fair and transparent process, which was important. But yes, I'm kind of very happy that Sue's joined and has hit the ground running. But yeah, any questions about any of the other decisions, happy to take them.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any comments, colleagues? Mr Pickup?
Yes, Chair. Welcome, Sue. Nice to see you. And I'm grateful that it's been possible to act as quickly as you have done in appointing Sue. And the Chair's confirmation that the process was transparent and healthy, if I put it that way. One of the challenges of such a post, and it's a challenge for, I know as you, a commissioner, who used to be a councillor, so you've suddenly got to be independent of that and objective to that. And one of the challenges, I think, in support of Sue, is how to maintain that objectivity and personal independence from previous roles. And I think as an employer and like manager in that sense, you need to ensure that that happens. I'm sure that is the case for Sue personally, but I think it's a clear responsibility you need to acknowledge. And the second part of what I was going to ask was, do you now have an idea of the timeline for the appointment of a permanent chief exec?
So yes, on your first point, you know, I mean, I'll let Sue speak for herself, but absolutely the independence was something we discussed, and I'm happy that, you know, she understands she's, you know, team PCC and not team police. And I think, you know, and the chief and the deputy chief understand that as well, so that I think is well documented. In terms of the process moving forward, so we've initially identified a period of 6 months as the interim. I am planning to recruit an external person to help me do the recruitment for the permanent post. And so I'm just putting together a document that will get quotes from people to make sure that's a fair, transparent process in terms of who would take on that role. There's a couple of people who have done this role before. Because the role is quite niche, I want to make sure that we're getting the job description right and that we're getting out to the right audiences and those kind of things. So I'll start that process, and again, happy to kind of report back to the panel as to the process, the timeline for that process once I've got somebody in post to do it.
Thank you. Just in response, Mr Pickup, just to give you some background, I have undertaken the role of monitoring officer and chief exec previously, working for North Wales for 6 months when I was seconded over there. And then for the last just over, well, 2.5 years almost, I've been working across 4 forces. So responding to the requirements and wants of 4 deputy chief constables. So in terms of that independence, I've well taken myself out of just obviously being an employee of Merseyside Police and recognising that my role is to support the Commissioner to make sure that she achieves what is outlined in the Police and Crime Plan. And my background is criminal justice, so again, some of the issues that you've also raised as well, I think I can also complement the work that I'm doing as the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Sue. Any other questions on this item? Mr Pickup, I see you looking through your papers. Are you going to ask a question? No? Okay. Thank you then. No, thank you, colleagues. Subject to any comments and queries being taken on board then, are we happy to endorse the decisions made by the Commissioner since our last panel meeting? Unless anyone indicates to speak an objection, I take it that we're all satisfied. Thank you, colleagues then. As there are no indications to speak an objection, it will be recorded. We are satisfied with the decisions taken by the Commissioner. Item 4, our next item is the Estate Strategy Review Update. Colleagues, you'll find that at pages 93 to 96. And I'd like to invite the Commissioner to take us through this report.
Thank you, Chair. So this is your update as to where things are up to. Obviously, the previous Commissioner had a quite robust estate strategy. So this gives you an update where those actions are all up to in terms of developments and also disposals. As kind of previously mentioned, we're taking a bit of a pause in terms of where we go next with the estate strategy, partly to wait and see what happens with the comprehensive spending review and just be mindful of any costs that we might be committing to. And obviously then there'll be a kind of further process of development around what the estate looks like in the coming years, and there'll be a consultation with the public and yourselves as part of that. So otherwise, I think all the details in the report, if anybody has any specific questions.
Any questions, colleagues, on this one? Mr Tadeo.
Yeah, I think the housing market is looking at like about 7% inflation. So how long would it take to put a property on the market? Is one question. And the other one is, do the funds from any property go into the PCC's coffers at the end of the day?
The properties identified in the report are currently should be out in the marketplace. There is an independent company doing that for us. So we're hoping certainly by the end of the year we'll be in a position to maybe sell the properties, but clearly there may be some issues with regard to planning permission, all that kind of stuff, which might delay it. But, sorry, what was the second question? Sorry. Oh,
where
sorry,
did we go?
in terms of the capital receipts,
Yeah.
they come to the Commissioner because the capital receipts, they're used to fund the capital programme. So in the capital programme, that will be, we'll use those first before we're left down with our borrowing requirements. So that's the way it works.
Right, so they're not used to make up any shortfall in the overall budget?
No, they can only be used, because they're generated from capital, a sale of an asset, they can only be used for capital expenditure. Right. But what they do is reduce your borrowing requirement, and that has an impact on your revenue budget in terms of less capital financing costs. That's the way it works. Oh, that's but great. We have built-in estimates in terms of these capital receipts, so hopefully you'll get at least them. If you get more, then that's obviously helpful going forward.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Hooton.
Thank you, Chair. Once the strategy is implemented, do you anticipate the same savings with the impact of Operation Uplift? Once the strategy is implemented, do you anticipate the same savings with the impact of Operation Uplift?
Do I anticipate savings?
Same amount of savings.
Oh, same amount of savings. So this is one of the issues that I have asked the police to go away and have a look at, in light of the fact that we are in a very different place to where we were a couple of years ago. Uplift being one of them, flexible working being another. So in terms of what I do with the revised estate strategy, we'll be assessing the impact of the increased numbers of officers and what that means. So, I mean, given that a lot of the recruits are police officers and we want them to be out and be visible, I'm hoping I don't think we're likely to suddenly start needing to build more police stations again, but this is something that I'm asking the police to kind of work through, so that when we update the strategy, we're reflective of the fact that we are starting to see officer numbers increase, so that will all be included and reflected on in the new strategy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Rowlands.
Yeah, just a quick one, Commissioner. You've mentioned about Rose Hill being finished by January. When did you envisage the staff to be moving in?
So we are hopefully getting the keys next week, and we will be moving staff in from then. So officer staff are moving in from next week, hopefully. They anticipate it will take probably around 4 or 5 months, I think, to get to that point. So hopefully by next February, we think it will be completed, and then it will be officially open and done, hopefully. And then I should say as well, we will do a formal opening at that point as well, and obviously panel members will be invited as part of that.
I mean, there are actually staff moving in there now. To be honest, there are some departments that have actually moved in there. Certainly, we've got a couple of police buildings on the docks that we're moving out first, so we can vacate those and obviously generate a saving as soon as we can, because they're built into the MTFS as well, those savings. So people are actually in there at the moment, moving in. But it will take up to February for everyone to move across.
Yeah, thank you, John. Mr. Pickup?
Just a quick one, really. COVID, as you say, has delayed issues regarding sales, etc. And I'm wondering if that has reflected in the value or the potential likelihood of sale. Just an example, we know previously there was quite a lot of interest in Canning Place, and that dispersal from interested parties. I'm just wondering whether you're aware of that interest has been kept up, and any likely reflection on value, etc.
Well, I say, in terms of Canning Place, we haven't got to a position yet where we're able to go out into the market, so we don't know. But the other properties, we're obviously waiting for the feedback from the consultants in terms of what we got. We hope the market will have picked up. I said there was some interest previously in a couple of the other buildings that we nearly got over the line just before COVID, but unfortunately we couldn't. But we hope that interest is still there.
Thank you. Any other questions on this subject? Excuse me. Thanks, Commissioner, for mentioning the opening up members of the panel. I wonder, we've said this in the past, but obviously COVID intervened, whether it be possible for some of the members or all of the members who were interested in visiting some of the site at Speak and the site at Edge Lane. I've heard good things about them, but I think it'd be useful if we could actually physically visit and have a tour around some of the new estate and the way things are operating. I think it would give us a better perspective of actually what's happening on the ground rather than what we're discussing here.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we did have one arranged, and then COVID kind of scuppered it. But yes, more than happy to arrange a visit for members for whoever wants to go. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Commissioner, and your staff. Since we have no other comments or questions, subject to our comments and queries being taken on board, are the panel members happy to endorse the progress of the estate strategy review? As there are no indications to speak in objection, then I'll record that this action has been endorsed. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Well, next item is the victim needs assessment process, which you'll find at pages 97 to 148. I'd like to invite the Commissioner to take us through this report.
Thank you, Chair. So, as previously discussed, I've made the panel aware I'm doing a full review of the victim services that I currently provide and the processes, the referral processes sit within that. So this report basically gives you an idea as to the work and the evidence that we use to try and inform that review. So it's a really good piece of work. Victim needs assessment, quite a thorough piece of work, so hopefully people have had a chance to read through it, and it just gives you an idea as to the kind of feedback that we're getting from victims in terms of what support they need, what feedback we might need to give to the police to improve processes and things like that. But yeah, happy to take any questions. Obviously, I've got Nick and Rainbow here as well, who did the work on the report and can answer any questions that I can't.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions on this one, colleagues? No? No, I think Sorry? Oh, Councillor Spencer, sorry. I saw you nod your head now, I didn't look at the screen. Sorry, the technology confused me. Councillor Spencer.
Not to go, obviously, over old ground, what we discussed before, over people feeling confident to come forward to report a crime. And looking at the figures, there was an increase in domestic abuse to 13% from 2017 to 2020. But we know that this is higher because people just aren't reporting it. And again, it stressed the importance of trying to build up that confidence of people feeling confident enough to come forward and report this kind of crime. It's, like I said, I don't want to go over, and I think we're all on the same page in that with it, but I think that there still needs to be a lot of work in building that confidence up between victims and the police, that rightly so is the people that we go to report a crime, and more importantly, that confidence to do so. And again, like I said, the figures itself speak for that fact that there's an increase, and I think we're all aware that, especially with COVID and lockdown, that a lot of domestic violence has increased because of that. And it just breaks my heart, the fact that you could easily double that for women that are not reporting it, that are just accepting it, and I just wish there was something more we could do, but I just wanted to...
No, it's a really good point, and I think in terms of the work that Rainbow and the team have done in terms of producing the report, we obviously haven't just looked at police figures because we know that we'll be underreporting on a lot of these issues. So there was lots of work done with victim services, domestic abuse agencies, who will probably have in some ways probably a more accurate picture of what's going on because they will see people that potentially the police aren't. So absolutely, that was part of the review. Rainbow, you've got anything to add?
Just to add, in relation to some of the feedback that is coming from victims in their specific consultation work, A couple of the thematic areas are going to the scrutiny meeting as well, talking specifically about that lack of confidence in the police and reporting, and kind of looking at what the police might do to address that and what plans they could make. And it's kind of on my mind of, we need to ask people why, what are their barriers, what is the fear or the anxiety, what would help them to come forward, and ask the people who we want to speak to rather than assuming anything. So.
Thank you. Mr. Pickup?
Yes, I would want personally to look at the current commissioned services and the distribution of finances, not least of which, for instance, rural isn't mentioned for whatever the past is, but there we go, in the list given. At the top stage, I'm sorry, external contributions, etc. But I think there's a very real need to look at distribution, commission services and the distribution of monies, and to ensure that they're properly used in terms, because I know at the moment a lot of organisations would be looking for money wherever it can be supplied, and to make sure that they're adequate for the services that are being commissioned. And in association with that, I don't know, and again, as the Commissioner will know, I'm quite good at missing things, so, but I'm not aware that there's any reference to the Witness Support Service. And the Witness Support Service at one stage was considered to be something that might come under the responsibilities of the Police Commissioner. That hasn't happened. It remains under the national supervision of the Citizens Advice Bureau. But in my view, it's one that should come under the Police Commissioner, because that would enable us to tie together a lot of the issues regarding victims, witnesses, etc., and how they are best supported in their process through the whole system. So I'd welcome the, as Police Commissioner offers, the confidential presentation, because I think there are some things that we need to look at further, but would recommend that the Witness Support Service should be part of the whole concept and brought together.
Yeah, so in terms of your first point, obviously, yes, we're more than happy to go into more detail offline, just because of some of the sensitivities of what we're discussing, and that's all being worked through at the minute, so we're more than happy to come back to you on that. In terms of the Witness Support Service, I don't disagree. There could be some advantages to it potentially being put within PCCs. The challenges are around the geography, because of the areas that a witness service will support in terms of its link with the court service, and actually, so, you know, the footprints that they work from. So it gets complicated and it gets messy. So it wouldn't necessarily be straightforward to just say, right, you do your bit, because actually you're trying to work in a court service that might be based across Merseyside and Cheshire, for example. So it gets a bit more complicated. I'm not aware that any conversations have been had around that being devolved down, but they, we met recently with the Witness Support Service, and they are waiting for a new contract to come out. So the government will be, no doubt, having these thoughts and these conversations. And so we wait to see what the government put out. And obviously, if there is a role for PCCs, we'll very much be engaged in that. But my instinct says that it's going to be a national tender again.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions, colleagues? Councillor Spencer?
I'm waving this time, just in case you missed me.
I've got you on the computer. Councillor Spencer.
I just wanted to comment on the modern slavery bit and young people. I'm glad that these are both included in it. I think a lot of people understand, myself included, up until recently, how modern slavery works. And I have 4 children and 3 daughters. I'm glad that the young people and the modern technology and the face-to-face, how that way. I think everyone automatically takes it that if you're young, everything's TikTok and everything's Discord, and not realising that they do want that face-to-face. And just wanted to thank you for the fact that that part was put in and included.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else? No? Okay, thank you, Commissioner, then. Subject to our comments being taken on board, panel members, are we happy to endorse, firstly, the victim needs assessments, secondly, the findings of the victim needs assessment activities, and then the recommendations of the victim needs assessment report? So as there are no indications to speak in objection, then it will be recorded that that has been endorsed. So thank you, Commissioner, on that. Colleagues, our next item is the update on our comments and recommendations from the previous meeting. You'll find that at pages 149 to 152, and I'd like to ask the Commissioner to take us through that report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So there were a couple of issues raised at the last meeting, and we've included some detail to the answers within the report. So hopefully that's all up to date and answered panel members' questions. But indeed, if there's any further clarification, I'm happy to take it.
Recommendations and comments. Unless anybody indicates to speak in objection, I'll take it that we are satisfied. Thank you then. We'll record that we are happy with the responses. Thank you, Commissioner. Just before I close the meeting, I'd just like to mention, I understand Caroline is leaving the position as head of the private office at the OPCC, and that will be prior to the panel's next meeting. She's taken up a new role with the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. So Caroline, we wish you all the best for that, for your new role. And I'd particularly like to thank you for all the work in coordinating the panel papers that we consider at the panel meetings, because without that work behind the scenes, we couldn't do this job effectively. So, you know, I mean, that applies really to all the officers who serve this body. I'm sure all the panel members join me wishing you the very best of luck for the future, and thank you for the past. Thank you. Unless anybody has anything to raise, colleagues, I'll bring that meeting to a close. Thank you.